side. This is News Channel 8 at 11.
Two young women, two unsolved murders. Now this man, James Winkles, says he's the killer.
Although I was in hunting mode all the time, my victims were random. They were targets of opportunity.
Tonight, a News Channel 8 exclusive. Good evening. I'm Diane Roberts, in for Gail Sierens.
I'm Bob Height. Thank you for joining us tonight. We begin with an exclusive Target 8 investigation. Tonight, confessions of a killer. Two women vanished nearly 2 decades ago, and now their families may finally have closure. Target 8's Marcia Crawley is here now with the details. Marcia?
Well, Bob, we first told you about James Winkles back in August. At the time, authorities were questioning him about several old unsolved crimes. Winkles says he killed 26 women in Florida. Detectives have no evidence to support that claim, but investigators do believe Winkles killed at least 2 Pinellas County women in the early 80s. Tonight, confessions of a killer. 58-year-old James Winkles is serving a life sentence for kidnapping and robbery. He's been a murder suspect for nearly 2 decades, but he's never been charged.
I enjoyed the planning. I enjoyed outwitting the police.
Now, after all these years, Winkles is confessing his crimes.
Feelings of guilt and remorse, along with my bad health, is the primary reason I came forward after being locked up and being a suspect for 18 years in these crimes.
In March, investigators transferred Winkles from a state prison to the Pinellas jail. For the next few months, detectives took Winkles to several locations where he claims he buried his victims. Despite Winkles' claims, they recovered no remains.
I believe this is it right here.
But other information Winkles provided helped detectives identify a skull found in northern Florida 17 years ago. Through DNA analysis, investigators now confirm the skull belongs to 19-year-old Elizabeth Graham, a woman missing from Pinellas County since 1980. Other information Winkles provided convinced detectives he murdered another Pinellas County woman a year later, 39-year-old Margot Delamon. She vanished from Pinellas Park in 1981.
The thing about it is, I never knew from one minute to the next whether they were going to live or die. The only 2 conscious decisions I made to kill, and it's because I spent time with them, was Graham and Delamon. And most of the other killings were just spontaneous.
Through countless hours of audio-taped phone conversations, letters from prison, and face-to-face interviews, we have learned James Winkles is a master of manipulation. We have also learned enough to believe Winkles is a killer. James Winkles also told us he hid evidence behind a duplex in Pinellas County where he once lived with his family. We gave that information to authorities. Tonight, Pinellas detectives and forensic experts went to the area to check out Winkles' claims. This is where he said he buried a metal box containing pictures of some of his victims. But after digging at the site for more than 3 hours, investigators found nothing. The state attorney plans to subpoena our taped interviews with James Winkles. Now on Monday night at News Channel 8 at 11, in his own words, Winkles tells us chilling details about how he kidnapped his victims.
I pulled out the handcuffs and she says, "You're really serious, aren't you?" And I says, "You don't know how serious I am." So I got her out of the truck, handcuffed her hands behind her back.
Now, also on Monday night, we'll talk to friends and families of his victims who've waited many years to find out what happened to their loved ones.
All right. Thanks, Marcia.
Thanks, Marcia.
Now, an exclusive Target 8 investigation. James Delano Winkles says he's killed dozens of women. The 57-year-old inmate is making these confessions to us from the Polk Correctional Institute, where he's currently serving a life sentence for kidnapping and robbery. Target 8's Marcia Crawley has been investigating this story really for months with News Channel 8 producer Stephen DeGregorio. And what have you got for us tonight, Marcia?
Well, Diane, Pinellas investigators first started questioning James Winkles about several unsolved crimes earlier this year. Winkles claims he's murdered 26 women in Florida. While detectives can't confirm the number, they do tell us they believe Winkles murdered at least 2 young women in Pinellas who vanished nearly 2 decades ago. We've been talking to Winkles about these crimes for the past several months on the phone. Winkles eventually agreed to tell us his story on camera. With permission from Polk Correctional Authorities, we spent more than 6 hours talking face-to-face with James Winkles. We want to warn you some of the details are graphic. And now, confessions of a killer. Elizabeth Margaret Graham was a tall, vibrant, auburn-haired girl of 19. She adored animals and never missed a chance to put on her hat and boots and ride off on her horse, Giovanni.
And we'd all go get on our horses and ride through the woods at night.
Liz shared her love of pets, music, and life with her boyfriend, Gary Muchmore.
I worshipped her. She was a ray of hope for me. And it was like, for me, it was someone that believed in me, someone that cared about me. It was very special.
Gary and Liz talked about marriage, a family, a future. Liz wanted to be a veterinarian. She had just taken a job as a mobile dog groomer at a business called the Pampered Poodle, when in one afternoon, all those dreams disappeared.
September 9th, 1980, a day I'll never forget.
It was Elizabeth Graham's first day driving the Poodle van alone. She was called out to this house on Bradford Street near Largo. She expected to meet a customer who needed his dachshund groomed. But the man in the driveway didn't live here, and he didn't have a dog. He did have a deceptive plan for abduction.
And I told her I was going to go into the house to get the dog. She opened the side doors of the van and she took one hose out and was bending over to get the other hose. When I turned around quickly and put a .25 caliber pistol to her head and told her not to move. I handcuffed her hands behind her back. I blindfolded her. I put her in the back floorboard of my vehicle.
In an awful twist of fate, James Winkles says Elizabeth Graham wasn't even the girl he planned to take.
Once it pulled into the driveway, I immediately determined that it wasn't the same person that I was expecting, but it was Elizabeth Graham. But the scenario had already been set in motion in my mind.
Gary knew something was wrong. He was waiting at the door when the Pampered Poodle opened the next morning, demanding to know the details of Liz's last stop.
I knew I went up 275 towards Bradford Street. I was flying. I mean, I was literally flying in the car. I went around the corner, and there sat the van.
James Winkles says he drove Liz across town to a home in Clearwater where his grandmother lived at the time.
From the back of my grandmother's house, it's completely enclosed with trees, and there's no way that anybody can view it from either side or the back. I took her straight to my bedroom and told her to stay there and remain quiet, and I went and told my grandmother and my aunt, who was there at the time, that I had a guest.
Winkles says his grandmother and aunt were afraid to turn him in. That's one reason he called his grandmother's the safe house. It soon became a house of horrors for Liz Graham.
I took the .25 caliber pistol and fired 2 rounds into the framework of my grandmother's house, my grandmother's bedroom door.
Winkles says as he held Liz hostage, he forced her to dress up in women's outfits he kept at his grandmother's house.
I had a giant drawer of bras, panties, garter belts, hose, all different sizes, all different colors.
Over the next 4 days, Winkles says he repeatedly raped Liz Graham.
I firmly convinced her that she was, in fact, going to be released eventually.
Then he went back on his word.
I was triggered into killing her the day before I did because she had seen a magazine that had the label on it to my grandmother with the address of the house. I gave her a heavy dose of sleeping pills, put her in a deep coma, and took a clear plastic umbrella, opened it about halfway up, put it over her head, and shot 3 times through the plastic umbrella so that when the holes in the skull released the blood, it wouldn't go all over the bedroom.
By now, Liz's parents had traveled from Detroit to Pinellas County to make a plea on TV, but Liz may have already been dead.
If anybody's out there that knows something, would they please come forward and tell the sheriff department about it. I'm appealing to their better sense of decency that they come forward, please.
Then a break in the case. A witness helped detectives create a sketch of a suspect. They didn't match the face with James Winkles until after he was arrested for kidnapping a woman in 1982. But he never confessed to killing Elizabeth Graham until recently. He led detectives to the spot where he says he buried Liz's body, this wooded area near the Pinellas dump.
I put the head in a black plastic garbage bag and took it up to Lafayette County and dumped it up in the river up there.
Through DNA tests, forensic experts identified that skull as Elizabeth Graham's. Winkles had provided detectives with a key piece of evidence linking himself to her disappearance and murder. Back in the early 80s, other women were mysteriously disappearing. On October 2nd, 1981, it happened again. Detectives received a call about a missing woman. 39-year-old Margot Delamon, a Clearwater realtor, had vanished.
She's very reliable, and she had had an appointment to meet with somebody in the morning, and everything's here except Margot.
Winkles says he made that appointment. He had met Margot Delamon while looking at log cabin homes with his wife.
There was something about her that just drew me like a magnet. The night before the abduction, I called her and arranged to meet her that Saturday morning.
He invited her to breakfast, and they drove off in his Bronco. Winkles convinced Margot to take a look at some property off Gandy Boulevard in Pinellas County. This is the same wooded area where Winkles claims he buried Elizabeth Graham. He pulled off the road, turned to Margot, and said, "You're being kidnapped right now."
I pulled out the handcuffs, and she says, "You're really serious, aren't you?" And I says, "You don't know how serious I am." So I got her out of the truck, handcuffed her hands behind her back. I told her just to be quiet. I wasn't going to gag her or anything like that. We're going to go up to a little safe house I had, which is the way I referred to it, and have a few funs and games, and I'd let her go. She says, "I can't believe this is happening."
Winkles' grandmother had moved from the original safe house, so Winkles says he took Margot to the house next door, the house his cousin rented back then. Margot's family waited by the phone for any word on her whereabouts.
I guess we were just hoping maybe she just, for whatever reason, just needed to be alone, and she would contact us later.
Winkles continued to hold Margot captive, repeatedly raping her and driving her all over town in his car he rigged so the passenger's side door and window could not open.
I terminated her, obviously, because we had been all over the damn place, and she knew exactly where that safe house was at. I overdosed her with sleeping pills, and it took her a long time to die. When she expired, I put her in a sheet and put her in the back of the Bronco.
He first buried Margot's body in Pinellas County, then moved her twice, finally scattering her remains more than 100 miles north.
I went back up close to the highway and down into a gator pond and took a pair of pliers and pulled the teeth out of the upper portion of the skull.
Less than 3 weeks after Margot Delamon disappeared, her torso and jawbone were found along Citrus County's Withlacoochee River, in the same area where James Winkles often camped out with his family. The top part of her skull turned up 7 months later and 30 miles away in Hernando County.
I didn't want to believe it. The way the whole investigation went back then, we felt we were getting the runaround by the sheriff's office at that time.
Finally, after nearly 2 decades, the loved ones of 2 women, Elizabeth Margaret Graham and Margot Cecilia Delamon, are getting answers to their questions.
The loss I felt so deeply was when her daughter got married. I remember sitting in the church and just thinking, her mother should be here.
Margot's family keeps her memory alive, spending time with her grandchildren she never met. Gary Muchmore now has a wife and daughter.
I have a beautiful family, have to go on.
He still keeps a suitcase filled with memories of Liz Graham, some he'd rather forget. Gary says he won't rest until the case is closed and a killer is brought to justice. Now, detectives dug for Elizabeth Graham's body in the spot where Winkles led them. They have never found her. The state attorney's office is also interested in James Winkles. Tomorrow, the office is expected to issue a subpoena for our taped interviews, and they plan to indict Winkles on 2 murders in January. So how did Winkles' reign of terror come to an end?
I'm trying to figure a way out. I'm not thinking, oh my God, I'm caught or anything like that. You know, I'm just trying to put together some way to get out of there and, you know, recover, resume.
So tomorrow night on News Channel 8 at 11, find out how authorities caught up with James Winkles.
He didn't seem very remorseful or...
What does he expect to resume?
You mean, what does he expect to gain from talking?
Well, he said, I want to recover, I want to resume.
Oh, he told me that he would still be doing this today if he hadn't been caught.
All right. Thanks, Marcia.
Remarkable.
And now the